Anyone learning economics at university right now is being taught 180 degrees the wrong thing. And I would encourage them to put their textbooks down and Google Austrian economics, okay? And read about Austrian economics, and then maybe you'll switch and not do economics at university anymore. The natural state of the world is that prices should go down and quality should go up, not prices constantly going up and quality constantly going down. We should have the perfect money, but we should have a big red button that they can press whenever they want. Of course, they never will. When the government is not involved, you just leave people alone, and you have perfect money. You get prices going down forever and quality going up forever. What's the difference? The difference is nobody's coming to save you. You have to save yourself.
Everywhere you look, Gen Z is told to just grind harder. It's get the degree, stack the side hustles, and maybe one day you'll catch up. But what if that problem isn't us? What if the problem is the system itself? That's exactly what today's guest, Joe Bryan, explains in his viral talk, What's the Problem? Instead of using spreadsheets and crypto jargon, Joe tells a story. He tells us about two societies, the Satoshis and the Fiatellos, and this big red button that shows exactly why our world feels financially broken. Welcome back to the Orange Peel podcast. I'm your host, Nikki, and today we're going to be unpacking Joe's journey, from his allegory to why the broken money system explains so many of the struggles that Gen Z is facing. There's student debt, trust in the future, and even financial nihilism. But most importantly, we'll talk about the solution that Joe points to, Bitcoin. Joe, thank you so much for being here. I am honored to have you on my podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Nikki. So thank you, and hello to your audience as well.
So before we dive into what's the problem and its allegory itself, I wanted to start a little bit with your background. Can you walk us through the journey from where you started to creating What's the Problem and what prompted you to do so?
Sure. Well, I mean, fortunate for me, relative to you and your listeners, I was born about 20, 25 years sooner. So I'm in a very different position as to the parent, also likely with the parents of all your listeners, to where you guys find yourselves today. And that's through no fault of yours. That's the fault of the system. But much like many of you guys, I went to university not really knowing what I wanted to do. I went to Oxford, studied physics, and then towards the end of my 3 years there, I decided I wanted to be a derivatives trader. So I applied to Goldman Sachs. They hired me, and I spent 10 years as an equity derivatives trader, mainly there, but also a couple of other banks as well towards the end. And then I left there to move into sports. So I created a sports technology company with a partner. We founded that and then grew that over the course of a few years. We were acquired by our biggest customer. We then joined the customer and then helped grow that into a global business today. And that was up until the start of last year. And now I've taken a step out of that business. I'm still a shareholder, etc. But it got to the point in 2020 where I found Bitcoin. And so for the last 5 years, it has become completely clear to me what the biggest problem in the world is, and that Bitcoin is the solution for this. And so for me to spend any of my time whatsoever outside of my family on anything, it has to be fixing the money. And so all my time now is spent on talking to people about Bitcoin, helping people understand, and building Bitcoin businesses, because this is, along with AI, is going to be the thing that most impacts your lives over the next 30 years. So that's a whistle-stop tour of my background. And so in January this year, I released a video called What's the Problem? Not expecting anybody to watch it. And it's now been viewed millions of times across the different platforms. Now, the reason I even made that video is because I was invited by a friend of mine to a weekend away with he decided to put together a very nice thing, which was to pull people from his life and get them all together in one place. So people who shared, an entrepreneurial mindset, or he thought would get on, and he invited us all to go and stay with him in Portugal for a couple of days. But he said, I want you all to bring something to talk about, bring something to share with everybody else. And so I hadn't, much probably like your dad, Nikki, we were talking before, your dad is a Bitcoiner. We carry stuff around in our heads because we're still so early in having access to materials, understanding that we're constantly consuming information and trying to piece together how the world works. And how Bitcoin works is it's complicated, and how one solves the problems of the other. But you carry it around as a jumble in your head. But this was the very first time that I had to actually produce something. And the only thing I wanted to talk about was Bitcoin, obviously. But I'd never had to articulate it in a structured way before. And so, not knowing who was going to come to this weekend, I couldn't assume any knowledge of anyone. So I had to say, like, if I've only got half an hour to talk to people, I'm not going to be able to explain Bitcoin. But if I tried, my target is after half an hour, I want people to want to learn about Bitcoin. Then that's a much more achievable target, and that's why I created it originally as a presentation in real life to 15 people, just called What's the Problem? And they didn't know it was about Bitcoin. All they knew was a title, and then I told them a story for half an hour, which explains why the world is the way it is. And then it doesn't have to be this way. And the fact that it is this way is entirely an artificial construct because the money is broken. And so if we fix the money, we fix the world. And then just to encourage them to learn about Bitcoin. But by watching What's the Problem, you build a skeletal mental framework for what Bitcoin is, how it works. It doesn't mention Bitcoin at all. But it's also, once you see it, you can't unsee it again. Because I think one of the problems, Nikki, and especially it's more and more of a problem when you're younger, like for you guys, is you haven't lived long enough. You haven't experienced all the things you will experience in the next 20 years. And so you are less informed about the world. You're not intrinsically less informed because you've had fewer experiences than your parents or your grandparents. They've seen many other aspects of life. And so you guys are getting all the pain and none of the benefit of the system. But it's also highly inaccessible for you to understand why it is the way it is. And also, you being at university or at college, you also tend to be in environments that also don't understand the problem. Academia does not understand. There is, a political bent that tends to come with most colleges and universities in that they don't live in the real world. And so quite often the explanations for things or the rationale or the solutions to what are held out to be the problems in the world are just totally wrong. They're just totally wrong because they're not based in the real world. They're based in political ideology. And you guys also have the challenge of trying to decipher what is real and what is not real, what is relevant and what is not relevant. And so it's very hard.
What I find the most fascinating about What's the Problem is that instead of showing us numbers and spreadsheets and throwing a bunch of data and price hype at us, you chose to tell us a story about two communities and this evil big red button. So for those who haven't seen it yet, could you just explain, the Satoshis, the Fiatellos, and what that big red button actually is?
Yes, What's the Problem is just a story, and when you watch it, it's got Pixar animated people in it and things. It's very accessible, and it can be watched by anybody, whether you're a child, old person, any sort of background, finance, non-finance. It's accessible to everybody, and it's a story, so humans remember stories. And you start off with a faraway land where there's smart people traveling on a ship across an ocean, and they get washed up on a deserted island, and they have to start again. They have to start civilization again, and they split into two camps because they have differing views on what they should use as money. And one, Satoshi, he defines the characteristics of perfect money, which they all agree on. And he said, well, we should lock that in. You should never change it because by definition, they are the characteristics of money. Why would you ever need to change those things? Whereas Fiatello, the other leader, he says, yeah, I agree. But what if the people we put in charge of the money want to change something? We should have the perfect money, but we should have a big red button that they can press whenever they want. Of course, they never will. I'll promise they never will. To change any of those characteristics. And then they build a big wall down the middle because they completely disagree on this, and it cuts off both sides. And the story is about how both sides of the island evolve naturally through the impact of not pressing the button versus ultimately pressing the button. And to start with, both sides have the same money because they haven't pressed the big red button on one side. So it's basically identical worlds, two sides of an island, and they start to see the benefit of using perfect money. And I'll give you an example here because we were talking beforehand about, and you mentioned it also in the intro, about the pain of inflation that we see everywhere in everything all of the time. And prices never go down ever. They only go up, which makes no sense. And people assume inflation is this sort of natural background process that we don't know where it comes from. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just one of those things. Or worse, you will have economics graduates listening to this, or maybe even friends of yours who go, well, we need inflation. We wouldn't have a growing economy if we didn't have inflation. Totally wrong. This is Keynesianism, which is anyone learning economics at university right now is being taught 180 degrees the wrong thing. And I would encourage them to put their textbooks down and Google Austrian economics, okay? And read about Austrian economics, and then maybe you'll switch and not do economics at university anymore, so your mind doesn't get poisoned in completely the wrong direction. I'll give you a very clear example of this. So within 2 minutes, you will understand that the natural state of the world is that prices should go down and quality should go up, not prices constantly going up and quality constantly going down, which is the world that we see today. And so on the island, they get washed up, they've got nothing, and they have to survive. So everybody's doing their own thing to try and survive. I'm doing my own fishing, I'm cutting down my trees for firewood and building materials, and I'm building my shelter. So even though we as a community use perfect money, I'm doing everything and I have very little excess because I'm better at some things, less good at other things, and I'm just sort of surviving. Because I don't have excess, I'm not trading with anyone. But everybody's doing the same thing, and I'm better at fishing, and you're better at cutting down the trees to make firewood, and someone else is better at building shelters. So we just specialize. I'll do all the fishing, you create the wood, and the other person builds the houses. And now we can do all of what we can, satisfy all our needs in half the time. And now we have excess. We have excess time to do other things, to reinvest in our processes, or we have excess capacity, which forces prices down. So you can now produce twice as much wood in half the time than the rest of us could have done. And so prices fall. And the quality goes up because you're better at it. You produce better quality wood. The home builder builds a better quality house. And it's not just us. There's hundreds of people. And there's lots of home builders competing. There's lots of fishermen competing. There's lots of tree cutters competing. And they're competing on a combination of price and quality. So the more they specialize, the more they compete, the prices fall and the quality goes up. And over time, you create excess time and excess savings, which you reinvest in improving your processes further. I can now build a boat. I can catch more fish. The home builder creates tools to help him build homes faster and better. Right? Increased specialization. This is just what happens when you leave people alone. Right? When the government is not involved, you just leave people alone, and you have perfect money. You get prices going down forever and quality going up forever. And this is just so blindingly obvious. So blindingly obvious. Everyone at home will be like, well, yeah, of course that's the case. Okay, well, that's of course the case. Why on earth do we only ever see prices going up and quality falling? What's the difference? The difference is the money. To some degree, it's also government interference in creating rules and regulations and putting sands in the wheel of entrepreneurialism, but it's mainly the money. And it's mainly the money because the quantity of money is constantly increasing. And this is where inflation comes from. Inflation is just money printing. We've seen this in the history books. Like you'll have learned about, I'm making assumptions here about American history courses in high school, but you've probably talked about the Weimar Republic after the First World War and the inflation, or probably Venezuela or Argentina, a bit closer to home for you guys. It's just money printing. You print money, the quantity of money goes up. Everything's worth more when measured in the money. And that includes eggs and milk and everything else. This is where inflation comes from. That's it. And so it's the money that's causing all of these things. It's not Vladimir Putin. It's not some mystical force. It's just the money. And so it's the existence of the big red button that the governments, brackets central banks, have to expand the monetary supply in their various forms, which undermines the purchasing power of the money. And so they're stealing from you. They're stealing from everybody constantly. But they abstract it away. They make it inaccessible. They hide it behind complex language. People who work in the banking system don't understand the banking system. This is where it comes from.
One thing that you mentioned that really stuck with me just now is you said this is the government stealing from us. And I think one thing that's been really big in Gen Z, at least in America, if not all across the world, is that we have so much distrust in government, in banks, in traditional media, in so many just traditional institutions. Can you break that down? Could you dive deeper into how inflation is literally about losing trust in the people that were supposed to be on our side?
Yeah, but I would say they're absolutely not on your side, and you're absolutely right to distrust them all. And if you've got any level of trust left in them whatsoever, you should remove it. Nobody's coming to save you. You have to save yourself. Okay. But it becomes a lot easier when you understand what's happening to you, what you are being subjected to. Most people don't understand what they are being subjected to, and therefore don't understand how to avoid it or how to turn it to your advantage longer term. And so if you think about the consequences of money printing corrodes everything, but in more explicit steps. So if you think about how did we go from a scenario where when you leave people alone and no one can print money for free, prices go down and quality goes up, to a scenario where prices are going up all the time and quality is deteriorating everywhere. What's changed there? Well, the change is the government's pressed the big red button. So they've brought more money into the existence. And we don't have to go into how that happens, but it's via the banking sector, via the issuance of debt, via the monetization of the debt, via the central bank. There's lots of different ways. Now, you can abstract that all the way to just a big red button that they press. And when they press it, the government has greater spending power than it should. Okay, and no accountability. So when they print money, it goes into the pockets of the government then spend that somehow in the economy, legally, illegally, with people close to the center of power. But when that's spent with businesses, like provision of services paid for by the government, for example, or consulting or construction or weapons, you guys love the weapons, then what that does is it begins to corrode the price signals in the free market. If you think back to the island, the only reason the prices of anything would change is because there's a change in demand or supply. If the supply increases, the prices fall. If the demand goes up, the prices go up. Okay, it's a free market. Everyone can compete with each other. But if the government is printing money and then spending that in the economy, that looks like demand. But it's not demand, it's just new money, right? And so what's the effect? It pushes the prices up in the areas that it touches. Now, that's then a signal to all the entrepreneurs across the economy that there's a demand-supply imbalance closer to the government. So what does it do? It attracts the capital, it attracts human beings to then try and compete for this extra demand, extra profitability closer and closer to the government. But by doing that, it pulls them away from all the other areas of the economy the government is not actually touching. So it makes them less competitive. It reduces competition. It reduces innovation. And so instead of prices falling everywhere, they start to slow. They start to not go down at all, but they're going up near the government. Right? So the government's undermining the price signals in the free market and undermining the productivity gains that everybody was previously seeing because purchasing power of the money went up. And so when those businesses, that's the first thing. The second thing is when those businesses spend money with other businesses or inputs, they hire people, they buy raw materials, they buy energy, this extra money starts to wash across the rest of the economy, but reflected in the inputs. And so every business, every entrepreneur starts to see their input costs go up. But if you're running a business, you're trying to maximize your long-term net present value. You want to maximize your long-term earnings from a business, not about maximizing your return tomorrow if you lose all your customers next week. You want to keep your customers happy, but you need to justify a sufficient reward for yourself to cover you for the risks of running the business. Because running a business is not risk-free. You employ people, you take on stress, hassle. If your customers stop buying, you go bankrupt. But there's risk. And so if you're going to take risk, it has to be a reward. And so that risk reward calculation for every entrepreneur is like constantly being assessed. And if your prices go up and your profitability, your input costs go up, your profitability, it begins to reduce. At some point you say, this isn't worth it. This isn't worth it. I'm making less money. I'm a more hassle. I'll close the business. I'll go and work for someone else. So as input costs start to go up, you see businesses starting to close. And the businesses that don't close have to find a way to reinstate their profit margin again. Not because they're being greedy, it's because the government printed money. The government printed money which eroded their profit margin. And so now every business, if you think about a physical goods business, like someone who manufactures something, well, the easiest thing is to say, well, my input costs have gone up. So to make the same profit, I'll just pass on the cost increase to the customer. So exactly the same product, like same size, same quality, but now it's just 10% more expensive. It's not me being greedy. It's me reacting to the government's printing money. And that's inflation. That's the way that the media, the government would frame inflation. Prices going up. But some businesses would say, well, I don't want to put the price up. What if I kept the price the same, I kept the quality the same, but I just made it 10% smaller. Maybe the customer wouldn't even know, right? Or I'll redesign the package and make it 10% smaller in terms of the contents. That's shrinkflation, right? And you also see this at the supermarket. You get less for the same amount that you pay. Now, this is not this is not included in the inflation statistics. So that's like semi-visible inflation. Like you see it sometimes you don't. So you got visible inflation, prices go up. Semi-visible, where it's shrinkflation. But then there's a third one, and the third one is to say, well, the business owner, well, I don't want to put the price up. I don't want to make it any smaller. I'll find a way to make it more cheaply. And the way you do that is primarily reducing the quality. So you use less humans involved. You now can't get anyone on the phone. You can't talk to anyone. There's no customer service. It's like it's just worse, right? So it leads to unemployment, which puts more pressure on the government. But it's mainly through corrosion in quality. So if I'm producing a mechanical thing like a kettle. So normally I buy a kettle, it might last me 5 years. Now it only lasts 2 years because they've used worse components. You would have no idea on day one that was going to be the case. So there's no inflation. There's no inflation. But you have to buy the kettle again in 2 years' time. So over that 5 years period, there's a massive amount of inflation because you had to buy the thing twice. And that is hidden inflation. That's hidden inflation. And we see this all the time. Like things just get worse. They just get worse. But there's a manifestation which is even more corrosive than this. In that if you think not about a mechanical product, but about something you consume, like food, you only consume once. You can't carry on using it. So if you're going to make that more cheaply, you use worse ingredients. It might taste better, right, to compensate, but it's worse for you. And so this is why we see the industrialization of the food. Increased levels of industrialized sludge goes into the food, less and less fresh ingredients, because it's cheaper. This is why we're all getting fat. This is why we have the obesity crisis, because the humans are consuming things we should not be consuming. But that is because of the money printing. It's because of the money printing destroying the quality, and it's inflation manifesting in health. And you absolutely won't find that in the inflation statistics. So when the government says inflation is 2% or 3%, we all know that's absolute nonsense. Because every time you go to the supermarket, it's like 10% more expensive. And the reason for that is you get to mark your own homework as the central bank and the government. They say like, we're going to target 2% inflation. So basically saying like, we're going to steal 2%. Our target is to steal 2% a year from you, right? But the reality is it's closer to 10 just on the visible piece. And you're like, well, how did you get to, and say they report it as 3%. Targeting 2, they report 3, it's actually 10. It's like, how do you get 3%? Oh, well, the price of chicken went up 15%. So we took chicken out the calculation and we put pork in instead. Because if chicken's gone up in price, everyone will buy pork instead of chicken, so there's no inflation. That's not how it works, guys. That's not how it works. But it's how it works when you get to mark your own homework, right? And so this is why everybody feels like there's this, what they get told about inflation doesn't match how they feel about it. And that's just on that visible piece. Because you have the visible piece, then you have the semi-visible, which they don't even talk about. They don't factor into the statistics, but we see in the shops every day. And then you've got the hidden, which is just this extra inflation through time and manifesting in massively negative human outcomes. So we don't talk about, or the government, the media don't talk about 2/3 of inflation. And 1/3 of that inflation is absolutely horrendous for us as a species. And so if you then think about what that means, if I'm either, as a customer, spending more to get the same and spending the same to get less, or I'm being punished in some other way from a health perspective. Those first two make you poorer, make you explicitly poorer, right? Every time you go to the shop, it costs you more or you get less for the same amount. You are poorer because of that. But you're poorer, the cost of those things are going up faster than your income is going up. And you play that forward, it means you have to make worse and worse choices. You have to start going down, independently start going down the quality ladder. It's like, well, I can't afford the thing I used to buy because now it's more expensive. I have to move to a cheaper version, right? So maybe my total spend each week is only gone up by 2%. But again, it's worse for me. Right? You're compromising all the time. And you end up having less money in your pocket if you want to maintain that quality. And then for you guys, like you're trying when you come out of college, you want a job. I mean, we can talk about the student debt in a minute, which is just horrendous. But then you're going to want to buy a house at some point, buy some assets at some point. But when you hit the big red button, it distorts the free market. It makes your cost of living go through the roof. But then the third thing, it makes the asset prices go to the moon as well. So you guys are stood there getting absolutely hammered on your cost of living, getting stuffed full of debt, and then you see the asset prices that you don't own running away from you. You're getting hammered from all three sides through no fault of your own. And the asset prices go up because the assets are measured in the thing that they're printing. If they double the money supply, the assets should be worth at least twice as much. And when they print the money faster than your rate of earnings growth, assets are going to go up forever at a faster rate than your earning power. So how do you buy them? With a massive amount of debt. If you want to buy a house, you have to take out a massive amount of debt to buy the house. And there's two things I would say on that. I said at least twice as much, because the assets that you want to own, primarily like a house, they're not considered a utility anymore. They're considered an investment. And you see this all the time, like people buy a house or rent it out Airbnb, or BlackRock buying up all the family homes, or these sorts of things. Homes are not assets, homes are liabilities. But when they're monetized, it changes. And I say they're monetized because think about, and this is not the case for you guys because you're drowning in debt and very little disposable income. But imagine you were born 20 years earlier, and when asset prices were a lot lower, inflation was a lot lower, money printing was still happening, but at a lower level, and you managed somehow to get cash in the bank. Right? So you've created some savings. If you've got cash in the bank, we all know you don't keep cash in the bank if you want to protect the purchasing power of it, because it's melting. If you keep money in the bank, next year it will buy less. The year after, a lot less. In 10 years, it'll buy half. In 30 years, it'll buy 10% of what it buys today. So you can't keep money in the bank. You can't. So what do? You buy a house or you buy the stock market, because they're a better store of value than keeping the money in the bank. And so printing money makes the asset prices go up because there's just twice as much money, but it also encourages everybody to buy the houses to try and protect their own wealth rather than keeping it in the money. So this is why you see the asset prices going up so aggressively in housing and all of these areas, because what else do? You're sat on a melting ice cube, but it doubly punishes you guys, right? And then say you did want to buy a house, say you managed to get a deposit together, you'd have to borrow a huge amount to be able to buy it, and probably need a partner. If you wanted to buy a house on a single salary, that's almost impossible these days, which means you need a partner, you both need to be working. And so if you're both working and you both have to be working to pay the mortgage, how are you supposed to have kids? You can't. This is why the demographics are shifting, because everyone has to go to working. It's been a long time, but The Simpsons is still being made. Right, and today it looks increasingly out of step with reality, because when it was made, you had Homer Simpson. You know The Simpsons, Nikki, right?
Yeah.
You had Homer Simpson, and Marge is a stay-at-home mum, and he's got 3 kids, detached house, a car, and he's like one of the least productive members of society. One salary, and not a very high salary, I'm guessing. One salary, right? That is not the case today. You cannot have Homer Simpson's level of average, and this is average guy in America type thing 30 years ago when this was made. They didn't make that trying to hold him out like he's being successful or he's doing well for himself. This was just like life. This is life in America 30 years ago. That just seems so far-fetched today. You just couldn't do it. You couldn't do it at all. Your wife would have to be working, and so you end up having fewer children because you can't make the economics work. Even if you wanted to have 3 kids, you'd have to stop working, have to take time out, you'd forfeit that income, so you'd lose the house. Right? So you're forced to work. If you're forced to work, you'd have to have someone look after the children, and the cost of that is, it just doesn't work. So you don't have 3 children anymore. You have 1, maybe 2. This is why the demographics are changing. This is why. Oh, yeah. I've been talking for a long time, but there's. I can go into more detail about people who are maybe not wanting to buy a house or maybe earlier in the journey, but I'll break there because you may have questions. I've been talking probably about 10 minutes.
The only thing that I have to say to that, the only question that's coming to my mind right now is why is the government continuing to do this? Why are they continuing to print money? It sounds like, almost everybody in the system is getting absolutely screwed over if you're not part of that central banking unit, I guess.
Yeah, great
Why
question.
are they doing this to us?
Several reasons. A, that they can, because they have a big red button. If I allowed you to have a big red button, you would probably use it. If you had a big red button that allowed you to live beyond your means because you could always bail yourself out by printing more money, you would ultimately succumb to doing that. So when the government issues debt nominally, so that means I'll sell a bond today, you guys give me $100, I'll pay you $5 a year for 30 years, and then I'll give you the 100 back. That's how bonds work. What they're not saying is I'll give you the purchasing power equivalent to $100 in the future. I'll just give you $100, but I can print the dollars. So if I'm ever short of dollars, I'll just print more dollars and give them to you. But the real value of the dollars when you get them back are going to be materially lower than they are today because I can just print them ad infinitum. And this is why the US government will never go bust, because it will just print paper. All its obligations are nominal obligations. So it's one, the ability. Two, who gets to benefit. You may have noticed that becoming a politician is a great way to get rich in America. You may have noticed this.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi is the greatest stock market investor of all time, right? She beats Warren Buffett hands down. It pays to be close to the big red button. It pays to have the ability to press it. It pays to have the ability to direct the funds that you get from pressing it to certain people, certain companies. And so you can't have not noticed that we effectively have a set of industries that are very, very close to the government. Pharmaceutical, defense, banks, financial sector, Wall Street, or very, very close to the government. Quite often it's hard to tell where they end and the government begins. And these are sectors which push to get regulated. So they push the government. You need to regulate us to protect the public. You need to make competition for us reduced. You need to set up walls, red tape, etc., so that we can make more money. That's the real reason. It's not we can protect the public. It's not. It's about creating a cabal, 2, 3, 4, 5 companies around the government who are all in on it, who don't really compete on price or quality, and therefore we start to see the price the government pays for anything go up and the quality go down. It's because the free market's been corrupted, because they put regulations in place, and the regulators come from the industries, and then when they finish their jobs, they go back and work for the industries, and they get a big parachute payment. It's just so corrupt. And this is not just an American thing. This is everywhere. But on a more fundamental level, these decisions are made by politicians. And what politicians want is power. No politician wants to lose an election. And so the election cycles every 4 or 5 years. And, you might have some people listening who are red or blue or feel very strongly about either of those. They're all terrible. They all print money. Like, you look at the history of money printing in the US, you cannot tell who was in power. They all just print money, because when you give out money, you win votes, right? No politician wants to deliver pain to any of its voters. No one is incentivized to make a long-term decision which requires short-term pain. And so the easiest thing to do is just to press the big red button, because you just end up stealing from people slowly and they might not even notice. And this is a great example of this is Wall Street. Well, we have a banking sector globally that is so incredibly leveraged that asset prices are not allowed to fall. So I give you an example. So when you keep money in the bank, let's say you put a deposit in the bank, that bank makes money by lending money, but it doesn't lend out the money you put in the bank. But the money you put in the bank is inside the bankruptcy ring fence, right? Liability ring fence of a bank. Bank makes money because it can print money for free. So it gets a license from the government, which allows it to make loans. Now, those loans, that money didn't exist before. So you walk in and say, Bank of America, please may I have, I was just the first one that came to my mind. They're all at it. It's not just a Bank of America thing. You say, please can I have a loan? And they go, sure, here you go. And they wire it to your account. That money did not exist before they wired it to your account. They have created money out of thin air. They then charge you interest on the money created through thin air, and you pay the money back. They create it through thin air because of the license they've got from the government. But imagine, and that works great for them because they earn money on money they didn't have, right? But it works badly for them if you don't pay it back, because suddenly they're then taking losses on this money that didn't exist, and they've got to account for that somewhere. So banks have a small amount of equity which they hold in the background against all the loans they've made. But over time, that equity comes down and down and down. It may have been 20% or 30% of the loan value originally. And then there's a banking crisis and people stop paying loans back. And asset prices start to fall, like 2008, the house prices start to fall. There's credit card delinquencies, there's home delinquencies. And then suddenly the bank realizes that they're actually going to lose 20% on these loans and they're going to get wiped out. And when they get wiped out, the depositors lose all their money. And so they call the government, they call the Federal Central Bank and say, guys, just so you know, if asset prices continue to go down or you don't bail us out, the depositors are going to lose all their money. And the people on the other end of the phone are going to go, well, not in my constituency. I can't have the people who vote for me losing money in the banking sector. We need to bail them out. The central bank needs to cut interest rates and print money, introduce quantitative easing. Let's bail out the banks. It's driven by maintenance of power. They can't afford the population to get annoyed at them and not vote them in again. It's just much easier to say, let's print some money and paper over the cracks. So what happens is they cut rates, they print money, the stock market then flies, right? The stock market is on fire, starts going up, and the asset prices go up. And then the banks become more solvent again. And also the central bank and the government take the bad assets off the balance sheet of the banks. Say, you've made a terrible loan, it's never going to get paid back, but here you go, here's $100, 100 cents on the dollar, we'll buy the loan from you. Bank, you're now clean and recapitalized, you can start lending again because you're critical to growth. And the bank takes all of the bad assets, which then lose money for 20 years. They end up having a massive loss, which they cover with money printing. And so the banks get to socialize the losses into the population by debasing the currency. But if it works out, they get to keep all the profits. And so it's the government bracket central bank having the ability to have a big red button which they can press wherever they want, which enables the banking sector to behave in this way. Because if the banking sector couldn't get bailed out, what would happen is they would be run more sensibly. A bank that did extend itself too far would go bust. It would go bust. Some people would lose money. But it would be a warning sign to everyone else not to do the same thing. It would be a lesson for the population that when you put money in the bank, A, it's not real money, B, it's not yours, and C, it's not in the bank. It's none of those things, but you're taking a risk by doing so. You are lending to the bank. It's not your money. You are lending to the bank. They go bust, you lose the money, which makes better decisions. So at least the population is making better decisions. And so all of this is just links back to the existence of the big red button being the problem. And so you say, well, okay, if that's the case, what's the solution? The solution is you don't have a big red button. You take it away. You've got to have a money that nobody can print for free. No one can print for free that you have to work for. No one can steal your life. No one can steal your energy, your time, your future. It's Bitcoin. Bitcoin solves all of this. Bitcoin solves all of this. It is perfect money. It is perfect money, and it is going to eat the world. Obviously, not financial advice. This is my view, etc. Do your own research. And don't trust me. Don't trust anyone. Go and start learning about Bitcoin, because it's humans always create problems. Like even if we have perfect money, Nikki, like we'd still have loads of problems, but they just wouldn't be exacerbated to the degree they are today, right? And so all these issues that we see around ourselves are all downstream of the fact the money is corrupted, the money is broken. So if we fix the money, we fix everything, right? And then it's just problems caused by humans being humans, which is the things we have to worry about. That was that again. I mean, every answer is like 15 minutes. I'm sorry.
No, this is all really, really good stuff. I wanted to hear about this. I have conversations with my friends all the time, and They say things like they'll never be able to own a house, so why should they bother saving? They'll never be able to start families, so why should they bother thinking about that anyway? And simplest way to put it, that's a very nihilistic, it's a very almost pessimistic way to look at the situation that we have at hand. And it's really, it's scary. The world is becoming increasingly more divisive. It's becoming increasingly more unequal. And Gen Z is a generation that really, really cares about fairness and justice, going from climate to social inequality to income inequality, all kinds of social justice. How do you connect that desire that we have for fairness with the broken system that we have, the broken money?
Yeah, so there's a nuance here. I think again, coming back to the political ideology that you guys tend to exist in the bubble of at university and college, it swings hard to the left, generally speaking. And what happens over time is when you begin to operate in the real world, you realize it's all nonsense. You realize it's all nonsense because it doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense because it doesn't follow from human action. And so we talk about justice, social justice, and inequality. Inequality is on steroids because of the money printer. When you print the money, the people who own the assets, they sometimes benefit, or it looks like they're benefiting because the value of them is going up, but their share of the pie is also coming down because they're also being stolen from by the government. They're just getting stolen from at a lower rate than the people who don't own the assets, especially through taxes and things like this. So it's everybody versus the central bank, not people who own less assets against people who own more assets. So there's a distinction there. And capitalism generally is the most moral of systems. And you quite often don't hear that argument, but when you talk about solving inequality, you can either have freedom or you can have equality. You can't have both. If everyone's going to be equal, there is no freedom. And so I think often people don't think about the negative externalities of wanting to feel nice and warm and fuzzy and say everyone should be equal. People are different. Some people are better at things than others. Some people work harder than others. Some people are more creative than others. That's just life. That's just life. And so what you want to do is try to give people equal opportunities to the extent that you can without compromising the rights of people. But you can't drive equal outcomes without communism. And so I'd again encourage everyone to think about the rights of the individual here. And that the fact that you guys get to go to college at all, or that you live in the greatest country in the world, is because of capitalism. You would not have reached this point. You would not have this opportunity if you didn't have a system like that rewarded success. Because, I would equate it back to the nihilistic financial view that your friend expressed. If there's no future, if I can never buy the assets, what's the point? And I'd reframe that and say, if there's no reward for my efforts or my creativity or my ingenuity or my insight, what's the point? What's the point? Why would I do it? So you stop doing it. Society becomes less productive, less competitive, with all the negative externalities that come from that. So capitalism is absolutely the most moral of systems, and it's socialism which is the anti-human. Because what is my fair share of what you worked for, Nikki? My fair share of what you worked for is zero, right? That's it. Any other answer is theft. It means you are in some part a slave to me, right? That's anti-human, right? And so, but people would say, well, what about the children, or what about this? There's always some like call to emotion. It's like, well, everybody needs to be equal. And no, if everyone was forced to be equal, the only outcomes there would be poverty and death. Go to any socialist or communist country in the world that has already existed, it ends up in mass murder, right? And zero rights for the people who live there. That's what happens because it's anti-human. It goes against the natural human action. And as we talked about on the island, the natural human action is people work hard, they become more productive, they want to improve their lives. And by doing so, when you have a perfect money, the benefits accrue to everybody. Everybody is working together in their own self-interest but to the benefit of everybody else. So you're the woodcutter, I'm the fisherman. We're all improving our processes. We're all competing, but the benefits of that accrue to the money. So as people save money, their purchasing power goes up over time, which allows them to buy more tomorrow than they did today. It allows them to plan longer term. It allows them to feel like they have a stake in the future, not holding an ice cube that's rapidly melting. Right? And if you have perfect money that nobody can print, every time you earn it, you earn a share of humanity's future economic output forever that nobody can take away from you. And just think about how empowering that is. It's like I'm exchanging my life, energy, my efforts for something I can reliably use in the future at a point where I wish to do so for what I wish to spend it on. And when that is the case, you don't buy a house as an investment anymore because you don't need to, because the money itself becomes more valuable. So I don't need to be forced into making those rash decisions or short-term decisions of, well, the money's melting, so I can't keep it in the bank account, so I'll go and buy a house. So if people can keep the money in the bank, they can keep the money themselves. They don't need to put it in the bank because Bitcoin you hold yourself. Then I don't need the house. So I sell the house and housing becomes demonetized again. It returns to its utility value, which makes it purchasable without a massive mortgage. Because why would you hold the house when the money is accruing in value faster than the house? You lose money by having the house. So you sell the house and you just keep the money. And so all the asset classes that have been monetized get demonetized again. And so think about your generation now. Now you can buy a house again. Now you can be Homer Simpson. Not that you would want to be Homer Simpson in most respects. You can be Homer Simpson again, right? You can buy a house on one salary. You can settle down. You can have a family. You can have multiple children. You can have money that grows with you over time, not melts away. And just think about the change in the outlook that would drive for you as a generation. But all of this talk has been very negative, but I am super positive. I am super positive about the future, and I am very positive for your generation. And I wish I was 20 years younger. Right. And the reason I'm very positive for your generation is you're 18, 19, 20 at a time where the next 20 to 30 years is going to be one of the greatest civilizational changes you've ever seen, or we as a species has ever seen. And so very, very occasionally things come along which change everything. The civilizational change technologies. One would be gunpowder, for example. Like when someone invents gunpowder, you have to adopt gunpowder. If you say, you can maybe not like it, you say, I don't like that gunpowder, right? But if you don't adopt gunpowder, they shoot you because you're fighting with a sword and they've got a gun. Like it doesn't work anymore. You have to upgrade, otherwise something bad happens. You underperform massively. And it's the same when the internet comes along. You can maybe not want to give your citizens access to the internet or these sorts of things, but when you do, you massively outperform. And then no one goes back. No one's switching off the internet. No one's saying, oh, this internet thing's a waste of time. It's like it's changed everything. You're not putting that back in the box. Bitcoin is for money what gunpowder was for violence, what the internet was for information. Bitcoin is the end state for money. And once you move there, you never go back. But we're at 1-2% of global adoption, right? And you guys are 20 years old. This is like the most amazing setup. Right? If you read about Bitcoin and you come to the realization, or you end up in a position where you think about it in the same way that I do, this is, along with AI, which is very supportive of Bitcoin, we can talk about that in a minute. There are a few generations in history who have had this opportunity. The boomers have made all the wealth in the housing, in the stock market, all of these things. They're all going to zero when measured in Bitcoin. Okay. We're on the verge of the greatest wealth transfer in history. And it's from people who don't own Bitcoin to the people who own Bitcoin. And eventually everyone's going to own Bitcoin because you can't fight it. You can't fight it once you connect the dots, once you understand what is happening. Bitcoin is the only solution. It's the only way that we can separate money and state. It's the only thing in the world you can actually own, that you can carry it in your head. Nobody can prove you have it, prove you don't have it. You can send it to anyone, anywhere in the world, anytime, instantly, at almost zero cost. It's fixed in supply forever. It's just perfect money. It's perfect money. Why would you want anything else? And when you realize the danger of the big red button, then you absolutely don't want. I don't want a melting ice cube. But when only 1 or 2% of people in the world realize this, you realize how early we are. And I should say Bitcoin is incredibly volatile. I mean, much less volatile than some big technology stocks, just to be clear. But it's very volatile as an asset, as a money. But that volatility is good. And again, it's something that you get hammered into you all the time is like, you must remove all risk, from everything. This is just like health and safety. And Bitcoin started out as a PDF attached to an email. That's it. And in my view, it's going to end up being the money of the world. And so to go from a PDF on an email worth 0 to being the money of the world worth at least half of everything, you have to have volatility. If there was no volatility, it could never get there. It can never go up enough in value to reach that point. But it can easily drop 80%, 90%, 95% from wherever. But that's fine. It can only drop 100%. But it can go up forever when measured in the thing that they are going to print forever. And so I'm not encouraging people to buy it. I'm encouraging people to learn about it. And to put it in context, Bitcoin is about 10% or less than 10% of the value of gold. That's it. And the total asset base of the world is about 1,000 trillion. And Bitcoin is about 2 trillion. So it's 0.2% of everything currently. Okay. And that's a reflection of the fact that not enough people know about it. Because it's complex. And the reason it's even needed is complex. Like you go and ask everyone in your dorm or your sorority or whatever, like, why do we need Bitcoin? I bet you right now, not a single person says to separate money and state. But that's it. It's the only technology we've ever had to separate money and state. And we all do it independently. We all do it individually, and no one can stop you. And it's not going to take many of us until things begin to materially change. And so just thinking about that next 30 years, I would encourage you guys to have a mental model of Bitcoin like the internet. So we're in the early 90s. And if you were in the early 90s and you said to someone, in 2025, everyone's going to be on their iPhones, iPads, grandmas, children, whatever. Everyone's on the internet. Everything's connected to the internet. You don't even have to worry. It's super easy. Someone in the 90s would have laughed at you. Don't be ridiculous. I'm waiting 10 minutes for the wired internet to continue to work, for me to load this web browser, which takes 5 minutes. Right? You'd be like, well, that's never going to happen. But like the underlying technology of the internet hasn't really changed. It's the infrastructure around it. It's the applications. It's the user accessibility. It's the knowledge and all of these things that have made it super easy today. But that happens very, very gradually over time. It's also over 30 years, you barely notice one step to the next. But the same thing's going to happen with Bitcoin. But once you realize why we need it, and once you have connected the dots, you're never going to change your mind about that, because it fixes everything. It's that you've already used your critical thinking to understand that it's going to fix everything. And so what's the natural outcome is you tell people, you share that information. They then realize, they tell other people. This is an informational virus that is sweeping across the world, and eventually everybody will understand. And when everyone understands, Bitcoin is baked into everything. It's the money of the internet. It's going to be everywhere. We're going to get to a point, in my view, where we don't even talk about Bitcoin. It's just money. It's just in everything. Like in the same way today, you would laugh if somebody told you they run an internet company. You'd be like, what, you mean you just run a company? But in the 90s, it was like, oh, what are you got these new internet companies. It's the same thing. Like today, we've got some Bitcoin companies. They're just going to be companies. This is exactly the same thing that's going to happen. But you guys get to come out of college with masses of motivation, masses of time, on the cusp of the greatest generational wealth transfer in history, and get to be on the right side of it, and then get to build businesses, get involved and advance your career by being Bitcoin experts. I mean, you've got an amazing 20, 30 years ahead of having competitive advantages for yourselves against a backdrop of just total pain everywhere else in your life. So there's lots of reasons to be positive and optimistic for the future. Right? Bitcoin is going to fix America. Bitcoin is going to fix the world.
That's such a hopeful message. I mean, on that note, it's become pretty obvious what the problem is. It's always been obvious that there is a problem. As you said, Gen Z has the competitive advantage. We have the advantage of time on our side. Now that we know that our money is broken, now that we know what the problem is, what is the first step that we can take to start learning and preparing and ensuring that we build a better future for ourselves?
You've got to do a small amount of work. Put down TikTok, put down doom scrolling, right, and invest in yourself. I'm being a bit flippant there. I've got teenage girls, and I've told them to put TikTok off all the time. It's probably, I don't know whether you guys use it at college or not, but they're mid-teens and they're using it all the time. You invest in yourself. Watch what's the problem, and when you've watched what's the problem, watch another video for 30 minutes, 15 minutes. If we'll put the link under the YouTube, Nikki, and then from there people can navigate and find another 5 or 6 little Bitcoin videos which explain different aspects of how it works, from the technology to the finance side to the humanitarian aspects that this brings. If you come back to what we were talking about before, if you want to drive equality, you want to drive equality of opportunity, Bitcoin is the solution for that globally. It democratizes access to money globally. It encourages the build out of green energy globally. Bitcoin fixes the climate crisis. Bitcoin fixes everything. It fixes absolutely everything. So you need to watch those videos. You need to watch those videos. Ignore everything that is not Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is not a get rich quick scheme. It's a don't get poor slowly scheme. You're being stolen from constantly. Okay, so learn about Bitcoin. Ignore everything else in crypto, which is not Bitcoin. It's all just fiat. It all has a big red button somewhere that someone can abuse in some way. Bitcoin is the only thing that does not. It is rules without rulers. It's independent of everybody, controlled by no one, stoppable by no one. An optional network. You can participate, you don't have to. Bitcoin is peace. Bitcoin is peace and prosperity for the world. So ignore everything that's not Bitcoin and talk to people. Go to a meetup. When someone asks you what's Bitcoin for, yeah, it's for the separation of money and state. You can tell people, share. But there's lots of reasons to be hopeful.
This has been incredible. I mean, you've shown us that, our struggles, student debt, impossible housing crises, and even the mental health burnout that we're facing. None of this is random. We're not at fault for feeling this way, which I think is something that we often get told, that we just need to work harder. But they're the ripple effects of this broken money that we have. And I mean, to close things out, if you're watching this, I will add links to what's the problem. I will add cards, put a link in the description. Check this video out. We don't have to live in this Fiatello world forever. And we don't have to keep saying it's okay when our governments press the button. So as Joe was saying, it's our generation's chance to fix the money, to rebuild trust, to make life fairer, and to bring our hope back into the future. Joe, thank you so much for joining me. Everyone listening, please go check out What's the Problem if you haven't already. It's the clearest explanation out there. It's how I started in Bitcoin and thinking about money altogether. For the listeners, let me know what clicked for you. Drop a comment, DM me, reach out to Joe. Just, interact, engage, learn about Bitcoin. I will see you next time. And until then, stay skeptical, stay curious, and stay orange pilled.